So working with my Alexnder Fleig clock again, it's been cuckooing properly. It's just that it doesn't run properly. It'll run for maybe a half hour, and you restart it. It might run for an hour or so, and you restart it. It might run for 3 or 4 hours. So it has issues. And checking the in shake in the second wheel here, it doesn't have any, if at all. And so the escapement wheel has in shake. The great wheel has in shake, but the second wheel, and I don't know how I missed that. So I have to take it all back apart and fix that issue. Now, on a side note here, my Antonio clock that I had to come up with the second wheel, it's still ticking away. I don't know why I didn't catch this before. I think it was because I was concerned about getting the clock to work with the Cuckoo. But the great wheel, it's got in shake. The escapement wheel, it's got in shake. The second wheel, you have to really force it to have in shake. And so that is an issue. And because whoever worked on this clock prior to me did a crappy job at putting these bushings in, I'm going to replace these bushings on both the second wheel, because they pinged it. And there's nothing wrong with pinging the bushings, in my opinion. It looks like crap. Other than it looking like crap, it works. But I'm going to fix it since I'm having to take this thing apart anyway. Plus the ratchet wheel, the great wheel, ratchet wheel, is giving me a hard time. It shouldn't be, compared to the strike side, it's easy. But the time side, it's giving me a hard time. So I'm going to figure that out, figure out why it's giving me a hard time. I think somebody replaced the click. As you can see, this is a brass click, and this is a metal click. It works. It's just that it's hard to ratchet. I'm just checking for in shake between the ratchet and the wheel, because this don't have any, and I think that's part of the problem. I think if I put a smaller wire here, it will loosen this up and it'll be easier to ratchet. The wire that was holding the ratchet together is about 1.2 millimeters. I used a small paper clip. It's now easier to ratchet, but the wire's too loose, as it has too much play in it. So I need to come up with a bigger wire. Like I said, it's easier to ratchet now, but it's too sloppy. I had some wire that's 1.1 millimeters thick, and that's what I put on it. You always want to bend it in an S shape, that way it don't come out. Now it's easier to ratchet, and it doesn't have that much play in it. It's got some play in it, but it doesn't have that much play in it. Now it's easier to ratchet, and I'm okay with that. There's a groove in this clicker to allow this wire to stay in that groove as it clicks around. And I said this before, I like doing the tilt test to determine whether it needs a bushing or not. You see how much that tilts back and forth? With a one-day clock, it would be fine, but this is a 30-hour clock, a true 30-hour clock, thick plates, and so it tilts too much, and so that's why it needs a bushing. And you always want to polish up your pivots prior to putting bushings in. Now, I don't have a lathe, so I use a Dremel or I use a drill. and always use an Arkansas stone unless you want to take your fingernail and rub or scratch the pivot itself. If you feel any groove in it, it's bad. This Arkansas stone, and I said this before, is smooth as a baby's butt. I can sit here and file my fingernail all day long, and it's not going to do anything. Unless I went fast enough. Anyway, this has no coarse. Some people use a piece of wood to polish pivots. I use an Arkansas stone, and you can purchase this through Time Savers. And the only thing that you're doing is shining up the pivot, basically cleaning it up. You put it on the stone on the pivot, turn on your drill, rub the stone back and forth, and you should be able to see there's a line up here and a line down here. That's the width of the pivot, and that's what you want. Now, if there was a groove when you took your fingernail to it, then you're going to need more than an Arkansas stone. You have to take that groove out. And that's why you want to polish your pivots prior to putting bushings in, because if you don't, and you have to make the pivot smaller than what it currently is, after you put the bushing in, the pivot is going to be smaller in the hole, and you're going to be upset. But if there's a groove, you're going to have to take a piece of sandpaper between two popsicle sticks or a file or something to smooth out that pivot to take that groove out. But anyway, I'm going to finish polishing up the pivots using my drill, Dremel, and Arkansas stone. Then we'll come back. By the way, there's a machine, I don't know what you call it, but it's like $3,000 or $4,000. Its only job is to polish up pivots. And some people might ask, how do you polish up this pivot? On this pivot, you put this part in the drill. But with this pivot, you put the whole thing in the drill. But you have to put it to where it's truly round. I already polished up the pivot. You see this spot right here? That's all dirt and oil and stuff from the pivot. But anyway, there's a machine. A friend of mine, Sean Barnes, has one of those machines. Its only job is to polish pivots. It's about this size right here. It has a lid on it. You put the wheel into the machine, you close the lid, it turns around and starts polishing the pivot. After a few seconds, you open up the lid, you flip it around, and you put this side in, and it does the same thing. Now, I don't know how it works with the third wheel with warning pen or with something like this that has a cam on it. I don't know. All I know is John bought the thing, and he works on clocks for a living. He can afford it versus put one of these things in a lathe, tightening down the chuck, grabbing out your Arkansas stone, doing what I did. That takes time. And when you're in this for business, time is money. And so why not spend, if you got the money, why not spend a few $1,000s for a machine that saves you a lot of time? If you're working on one clock a day for yourself, you got all day long. Time is yours. But when you're doing this for a living, time is money. You're not working on one clock a day. You're working on several clocks a day. So why not get something that is more convenient for you? Now I got the pivots polished up. I want to measure the pivots. And Cuckoo clocks, for the most part, their pivots are always around 1 millimeter. Except for this one, because somebody sanded it down, is 6 millimeters. 7.7 millimeters. So, where this one is 1 millimeter. And I'm sure it's going to be the same for the escapement wheel. 1.1, 1, something like that. 1 for the escapement wheel. So for this one, because somebody filed it down, maybe it had a groove in it, or maybe they didn't know that you're supposed to use an Arkansas stone when you polish up pivots, that they filed it down and they made it smaller. And so the hole, if I was to put this into the hole, I bet you anything, yeah, see, the plates touch, the wheel touches the plates, so the hole is way too small. Part of my problem right there. I'm not going to be able to do what I was telling you, and I'm going to explain why. This is the bore diameter, okay? Remember, I got one where the bore diameter is 0.6. Sorry, this is the height. I'm telling you wrong. This is the bore diameter. Okay, this is the height. And then this is the diameter of the bushing itself. Okay, the bore diameter is 1.0, and so I could use a bushing L62, but the diameter is only 1.8. I could use L65, but the diameter is only 1.8. I could use L14, but the diameter is only 2.7. I could use L37, but the diameter is 1.8, or I can use L99, but the diameter is 2.7. Okay, now let me show you what the diameter is on what I need. And by the way, this is a KWM chart. If I was to try to clear up these ping marks, I would need something that has a diameter of 5.1, 5 millimeters. In other words, I would have to have solid brass that is 5 millimeters and a lathe. That way I could put a hole in the middle of that brass to make my own bushings, to get rid of these ping marks. So I'm not going to be able to get rid of those ping marks because I don't have a lathe, and it would take somebody who does this professionally for a living to fix. So the only one that I'm going to worry about is this one right here that has the bore diameter of 0.6 millimeters that I told you is touching the plates. This one right here. I'm still not going to be able to get rid of the ping marks, but I'm going to put a different bushing in because that hole is way too big for this wheel. It shouldn't touch the plate. And I'm going to do the opposite side because the opposite side has too much play in it. So I'm not going to be able to get rid of the ping marks is what I'm getting at. But I'm going to try to close up the holes because this hole is too big also. There's too much tilt. I am not proud of what I had to do to get this thing to work, but it does work. The person that worked on it before had 2 different bushings in it, like I had to do. Okay, and like I said, technically what you should do is have a solid piece of brass and a lathe. You cut the diameter and the length that you want, and you drill a hole for the bore that you want. But when you don't have the proper equipment, you have to do what you got to do. So I used a bushing that was 3 millimeters in diameter and height and bore, because that's what I had. Plus the first bushing that I put in was out of my KWM kit. That was 5.9 millimeters in diameter, and so I had to put that in first to make up for the outside diameter of the 3 millimeter diameter, because it just dropped right in the hole. And like I said, the proper way is to have solid brass and a lathe and cut off the length that you want, put it in your lathe, drill a hole for the bore. But it works. And now I have end shake. So, time for the next step. 2 bushings down, it continues to spin. That's what you want. It has end shake. And it no longer has all that wobbleness. Time for working on the escapement wheel now. Now I have the escapement wheel done. As you can see, it's sitting there spinning as it's supposed to. And it has end shake. And no more great tilt in the wheels. There is some tilt, but not like it was before. So now it's time to put the movement back together. Now I have the movement back together. I want to discuss a few things. I try to discuss this every time I'm working on a count wheel movement because people seem to have a problem with it. Maybe it's the way I'm discussing it. I don't know. First of all, the hammer, it has to be barely off one of those pins, which would be the 8-point star wheel on the great wheel. The low note lever and the high note lever occupy the same space in between 2 pins. So when the clock is done cuckooing, the low note lever is not occupying, it actually comes down. It's not occupying the same space with the gong lever, the hammer lever. If it is occupying the same space, then you have to take this nut off. I would suggest putting some rubber bands on, and that way things don't go flying on you. And then you have to separate the bottom plate so you can pull out the great wheel away from the second wheel and move it 1 notch one way or the other, and then put it back on to make sure that the low note lever is occupying the same space. You should be able to see this. It's not occupying the same space. The low note lever is occupying a space all by itself. The high note lever is occupying a space all by itself. Most of the time they occupy the same space. And the gong is occupying space all by itself. So when I trip it, it gong, coo, coo, and then it stops. This wire right here is part of this wire right here. As the minute hand turns, there's 1 of 2 pins that lift this wire. And when it lifts the wire, currently the third wheel with warning pin is on the end of this brass lever. This brass lever is the same part as what I'm touching. It's the same part as a lever that goes into the count wheel, this brass lever. And it's the same on every count wheel clock. It might not be a brass lever, it might be a metal lever, but it all acts the same way. When this wire, when the pin lifts up this wire here, this wire right here, it goes into warning. I don't have pressure on it, so when it goes into warning, that pin is now riding the hump of that wire that goes around the second wheel, and it'll stay there until this lever drops. When it drops, that gives the third wheel, it frees it up so it can cuckoo. When it's done cuckooing, this brass lever has got a notch on it. I'm trying to make it so you can see it. It's got a notch on it, and it goes into this cam, which has a Pac-Man's mouth on it, what I call the Pac-Man, and I'm going to rotate it so you can see it. When it's done cuckooing, this will be at the 12 o'clock position, and the flat spot will be at the 3 o'clock position. The brass lever goes into the mouth, the third wheel warning pin hits the end of it, and this lever here goes into the wide notches of the count wheel. I just don't have the count wheel on yet. With this particular clock, it's controlled. You could take this out. It goes that way, Mark. And then a wire holds it in. As you can see, as I rotate this, it lifts up this wire, which in turn makes this wire here push in the bird, makes the bird come out. And I have to talk about that also. This bird has a spring on it. When that bird comes back in, that spring is what causes this wire here to come out. When that wire comes out, this lever goes into the count wheel. If your clock is continuing to cuckoo and you have the initial setup of this brass lever going into the backman's mouth and the third wheel warning pin hitting the end of that brass lever, it's more than likely you don't have enough tension on the bird post spring wire to bring this lever to force it into the count wheel to complete the sequence of cuckoo. And that's why I say, when I work on a clock, when you trip the cuckoo, watch it. I got it upside down. It comes back up. And that because I have this wire with enough tension to make the bird come back in with the clock movement upside down. In the normal position, see how fast that thing comes back? And so put a few more loops, pull this wire tight so you have a good tension on the bird coming back in the door, because that wire serves two purposes. Makes the bird come back in the door, and it makes this lever go into the count wheel. I'll talk about it more when I put the clock all back together. This intermediate wheel, or on a regular cuckoo clock, is called the minute wheel with minute pinion. It's got a compression washer on it. The purpose behind that compression washer is to control your hands. If your hands are dropping, you need to tighten up the compression washer. If your hands are not turning, it could be that the fact that your compression washer is not tight enough. Your clock might tick all day long, but your hands don't turn. And what I would suggest to you in that case is leave the hour pipe off, put this wheel back on along with the washer and the pin that goes in the hole, and then put a black line between the two wheels like I have here, and then put the weight on and make the clock tick to see if that line is going to move. And you have to put the black line on both wheels so you could see whether or not that black line is going to move. In this case right here, it's not moving, and that's because I don't have the washer and the pin on it. Now, let me put the washer and the pin on and show you what happens. Again, I got the hour pipe off so I can explain this. Now there's pressure on this wheel, so let me make it tick now. You see the black lines moving? And now that means your hands are turning. If you don't have enough pressure on that compression washer, your clock could tick all day long, but your hands won't rotate. It's only because I added the washer and the pin to put that much pressure on it to demonstrate for you that it has to have just the right amount of pressure. If it's got too much pressure and you can't rotate the hands easily, you need to loosen it up some. The purpose behind this washer is to make sure this hour pipe don't come off. So I have to put the washer back on and the pin back on. And I like bending these wires so they don't come out. This should be fine there. And maybe a little bit more curve in. So now, again, I'm not going to add another black line, but with the right amount of pressure, as you can see, the lines are moving, and I have to check the hands to make sure they don't drop. And you want to use the hand that comes with the clock, or that is going to go with the clock. This is a heavy hand. It's the hand that Justin Barron card for me. As you see, I can turn it and it's not dropping. And you should also see that the wire is going to trip right at the 12. But I now have to put the count wheel on to make sure this wire is coming out of the count wheel, because I told you that this wire is all part of this system. If this wire is not bent properly, then it can't, this lever can't come out of the count wheel. And I have to put this little gear here on, which is for the stretch side grate wheel. So I'll come back. I have a weight and a chain, and as you can see, when I turn the hands, the lever starts to come out of the count wheel, but it don't get lift high enough. And that means when I took it apart, the wire in the front and the wire, these wires, somehow they got just a little bit out of adjustment, so I have to put it back in adjustments. Now with that wire adjusted, I can rotate the hand and it trips the clock. Now with this particular clock, I tell you in all my other videos that this lever here has to be parallel with the notch. But with this particular clock, when it's parallel, it will bounce, and I think it has something to do with this lever. It's thin and then thick, and so when it hits the thickness, it forces it to come out. So you have to angle this lever from left to right just a little bit, and that allows it to perform properly. I've sit here and gone through every one of the numbers, and this is the second time around. So now I'm going to take this stand in the other room, put it on my table, add the chain and the weight for the time, allow it to tick away for a while. And as promised, like I said, that brass lever that goes into that second wheel cam, the Pac-Man, when the clock is done cuckooing, this lever goes into the notch, the wide notch of the count wheel. The bird post arm forces that lever to go into the count wheel because of the spring. The third wheel with warning pin, it hits the end of that brass lever. You should be able to see it if I have it in the right position. There's the brass lever. There's the third wheel with warning pin. It's hitting the end of that brass lever. So when the clock goes into warning, like I said, the third wheel, the brass lever is going to be lifted up just a little bit, and then the third wheel with warning pin is going to hit the hump of this wire. And it has to ride on top of this wire. With this particular clock, I cut it short once. And there it's not right. It's not hitting the that wire when it goes into warning. So I'm going to have to make that hump. Going to have to adjust that, because as you can see, it is bypassing. Currently it's in warning, and it's bypassing that hump. It was an easy fix. The wire that third wheel warning pin was bent too far forward, so I bent it backwards. Now when I rotate the hands, the brass lever comes up, the third wheel warning pin goes underneath that brass lever, and it rests on the hump of that wire. As you can see, it's in warning right now. The governor fan moved a little bit, and I'm rotating the hands. Comes out of warning. Let's watch that again. Pay attention to the governor fan. Governor fan moves. The third wheel with warning pin, I don't want to touch it, is underneath that brass lever. And as the clock ticks, I hope I explained that well. Some people have issues with why the clock cuckoos when it goes into warning, why their clock cuckoos and it doesn't stop. I tried to explain this over and over and over again in these count wheel type movements. This thing was having trouble ticking, and I had a heck of a time trying to figure out why. Like right there, it stopped again. Your clock kept stopping, and you move it a little bit, the virgin cartridge assembly, it wouldn't move. You move it some more, it wouldn't move. You press on the second wheel, it would move a little bit. I think the issue is this pen was bent. I straightened it out quite a bit. I'm going to try that. Hopefully it'll work. If not, I'm going to have to replace this pen, this pivot. Now they do make, or they used to make, I don't know if they still make it or not, but they used to make capped pivots. What you would do, you would cut the pivot off. Instead of drilling a hole, you would buy this cap that had a pivot on it, and you would slip it over the arbor here, and that's helped out when you didn't have a lathe to repivot the staff here. Again, I don't know whether they still sell it. There's a lot of mixed reviews on the capped pivots. A lot of people like them, a lot of people don't like them. There's mixed reviews on anything you come across in the clock world. I'm also going to try to move this wheel down the shaft. If you look, I don't have the wheel in the pivots, but you'll get a good idea. The wheel is barely catching on the pinion gear of this escapement wheel. It's more, it's almost touching the cap of that holds those wires together. So I'm going to try to move that wheel down. And the way that I'm going to try to move this wheel down is I'm going to put this wheel on a board, on this board that has a hole, and then I'm going to take this, which fits over the pinion, the pivot. Actually, I want to see if I can find a smaller one. And then I'm going to take my hammer and very carefully tap this down. And what it's going to do, it's going to tap the shaft through this wheel. Well, that's what it should do. And hopefully I don't bend or break this pivot in the process. And then I'm going to try it out and see if I moved it. I think I moved it some, but I want to move it some more. So that's what I'm going to do. So I had to take the movement all back apart because one of the double bushings that I put in fell out. So I had to take it back apart to fix it. As you can see, the second wheel lines up with the third lantern gear, where before it was up more. So that should help this thing run better. So I got this movement back apart, looking at, because it'll stay ticking for a few minutes, and then it stops, and you can start the pendulum again. It doesn't tick once. So I'm trying to figure out what's going on. I'm looking at the lantern pinions to make sure that they're okay. They seem to be okay. The teeth all seem to be okay on the second wheel. Same way with the escapement wheel. And the only issue that I see is on the Virgin crutch assembly. You see where the teeth have been hitting that? They should be hitting that, but because they're supposed to be doing this number. But I guess they would hit a little bit. But I'm going to clean that up. Looking at the escapement wheel under the microscope, like I said, the lantern pinions, they don't look like they have any flat spots in them. They look okay. The teeth, they all look the same. So I don't see any issues with the escapement wheel. There's a second wheel. I don't see any issues with the second wheel. If there was a tooth that was bent, yeah, that would cause the issue. But I'm not seeing any issues. It must be, I don't know for certain. It's got to be in the verge and crutch assembly. And the depth that the crutch, the verge assembly is going down onto the escapement wheel. However, like I said, it'll run for several minutes and then it stops. And then you hit the pendulum again and nothing happens. Could be that the bushings, the bore of the bushings need broached out a little bit more. So I'm going to do that. But it's a mystery. Been running strong for over 2 hours now. I'm going to let it run all night. And if it stays running, I'll put it back in the case. The clock's been running for about 6 hours now. And so if it continues to do this, tomorrow I'll put it back into the case. And I'll show you what I did to get it to work. I told you I would tell you what I did different. First of all, I cleaned up the crutch assembly like I showed you. It had all those marks and stuff on it. And I normally clean that stuff up when I take the clock apart. I don't know why I didn't on this clock. Maybe I had my mind on other things. I have no idea. But I get to the habit of checking that stuff is what I'm getting at. And in the process of me doing everything, the bushing fell out of this clock, out of the escapement wheel. And this bushing is 1.5 millimeters in diameter. So with the pivot being 1 millimeter, there's an extra 0.5 millimeter play. And you should be able to see it rock back and forth. And normally I would say no, don't allow that, but this clock has been running for 15 hours like this, and I'm going to put this movement into the case and see if it stays running, and if it does, then I'll be one happy person. But typically there's too much play in a 30-hour movement, a true 30-hour movement with that much play. However, in this particular clock, it's running just fine. Again, I'm going to put it into the case and see what happens. And there it is, back on the wall where it belongs, ticking away. I hope y'all enjoyed this video. I hope it helped you out. Never give up. Give me a thumbs up, leave me some comments, and may God bless each and every one of you. On a side note, I need to extend this out 3 or 4 inches, because when I put that huge clock on this stand, it barely fits. I also need to add another block of wood and put a bolt through the block of wood, just one bolt and a nut. That way you can swivel the front. Again, leave me some comments and may God bless.